So, welcome, guys. Today we have got Mr. Stuart Jubb on the podcast. Now, a slightly different podcast this week in terms of Stuart was a client with me many, many moons ago. That conversation is probably less relevant for today, more so. And also, just as an aside, I know Stuart from Jiu-Jitsu as well. We spent many an hour sweating and trying to strangle each other and giving each other aggressive cuddles, you could say. But the reason I'm getting Stuart on today is he's got a really interesting story and journey in terms of where he's come from, where he is today. Stuart's got a military background, now heading up a large team business in a corporate setting. And I think what I want Stuart to come on and talk to you about is something I bang on about a lot, which is accountability, discipline, but also that whole perfect's the enemy of good enough. Life is chaotic. There's always stuff going on. What can we do in this sort of the order of that chaos? And I think in a military setting, kinetic, war, although it sounds very dramatic, often there's plans there that go awry, but how do you get and squeeze the juice out of a situation no matter what's going on? And Stu's got some amazing insights, and I think it will really feed into the ethos of what I do in terms of the 1%, how you sort of can take ownership in even the most dramatic and intense situations. And so I think Stu will give some awesome insights for today. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I also want Stuart to do more talking, so I'll hand over to you in a sec. So Stu, do you want to just introduce yourself, a little bit about you, who you are, what you do?
Thanks, Luke. And I just want to, I know some of your followers know that you do jiu-jitsu, but I just want to let them know that Luke is an absolute beast on the mat. So, we have had some fairly decent battles over the years, but it just kind of shows what a sport jiu-jitsu is, that, we've become friends through jiu-jitsu.
Exactly. Well, it's another example of that. You bond through hardship, right? Because actually, you should try to sort of kill each other, break each other's arms and stuff, and actually become good friends as a part of it.
But yeah, no, thanks for the introduction, and thanks for having me on, Luke. It's a real pleasure. Love what you're doing, and love all the messages that you stand for. And yeah, so my background was that I worked for a couple of years in a bank when I first left university, and I'd always wanted to join the military. And I was kind of saying to myself, well, join the military. So I did. I was a little bit older, and this was early noughties. So anyone who sort of followed recent history, we were obviously in Iraq and Afghanistan a lot. So I deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 4 times as an officer, a couple on the ground, a couple working in headquarters. And I was in Afghanistan in 2007 on a particularly dangerous tour where, it's very fierce fighting, which I'll come on to in a bit. I left the military in 2012 and I went into consulting, didn't really put a huge amount of thought into it, saw a decent paycheck and thought that would be quite cool. And then spent 4 years trying to get out of consulting. So I joined a startup in 2016. We exited that business last year. So we sold the business off to a few different companies. And I now head up a cyber team at a big managed service provider. So we're growing that cyber team. We're looking at potential acquisitions this year. And we're also investing heavily in artificial intelligence. So helping other businesses take advantage of artificial intelligence.
Nice. So I guess I suppose when you look back, the journey probably often always makes sense, but also quite an interesting path, right? University, no military, because typically a lot of guys, it's kind of straight from school in the military. There's always been a desire for that. You, slightly different sort of journey, but then also joining the military in a time when it's not like you're going to be stood twiddling your thumbs. You consciously know there's lots going on, right? So I guess that's quite a big decision to make, having come out of that and then defined a corporate career. What made you make that decision? What was the driving force behind that?
Yeah, I suppose you're right. No real military history in my family. I was like most typical active boys and teenagers, played a lot of rugby, played a lot of sport, like the outdoors. This is pre-social media phones and stuff, so always quite active. And then I'd always read a lot of books about the military. So I'd always had this kind of burning ambition and just got to a point where I just knew if I didn't do it, I would be frustrated, and I knew a desk job wasn't for me. The invasion of Afghanistan had happened, the invasion of Iraq had happened. So I knew that I would be going to war, and I knew I would get to actually do my job in a real life setting. So, and probably an element of wanting to test myself, was I able to cope with those difficult circumstances and the challenge, a whole number of reasons. Really.
Yeah, I think I guess not something I've ever done myself, but it's the kind of thing you look back as an older man and go, actually, I think now with where I'm at, I would have probably quite liked. Maybe, and I'm sure as civilians we've got rose tinted glasses on what it's like, but you look back and go, actually, maybe I could have had a bit of that. Having said that, if I know what I was like when I was that age and my head was not in that place, so it's, it's always you can't really split test your life. But equally, I think it's an interesting path and journey to make that decision, consciously knowing that there's this stuff going on, and also having not been kind of like, this is what I want to do since being, a young boy. So let us kind of dig into some of that, I guess, discipline, accountability, and we started off the conversation saying turning the sort of the chaos and the I guess the melee into something coherent. How do you translate what you learnt then throughout your military career into what you do today? And what kind of examples do you think you could give to help sort of highlight some of that kind of thinking and that mindset?
Yeah, so there's probably a couple of things. I mean, you typically find, and my boss is American, he's not ex-military, but he loves working with ex-military because he gives them to do something, and I'm working very closely with him at the moment. It gives me something to do, and it just gets done. And in my experience, that isn't always the case in the corporate world. You have to chase people 2 or 3 times, and that takes time, and it's quite frustrating. But also, ex-military people can be very proactive. So they kind of, you have this thing where you know what the overall intent of your boss is, and you don't necessarily need to be told exactly what to do. So you work out all the second and third order effects, and then you will then just crack on and do those sort of things. And, I've had ex-military in my team, and there's a load of stuff you're worrying about, and they just go and get it done. So that's very good. I think probably the biggest lesson I've learned is just clarity of communications. So for example, I joined KPMG, and my first boss came up to me and said, "Oh, I love the way that you write down what everyone needs to do." I was a chief of staff. Everyone needs to do it in a meeting, and then you follow up on those things. And that was seen as some kind of, absolute nirvana. No, they'd never heard of this before. But it was just, there's a load of stuff that needs to be done, and you followed up on it. But also you have those conversations sometimes where it's ambiguous, whether has that person been told to do something? What is it? Have you confirmed that they actually understand what they've been told to do? So just when you're speaking to someone, you almost say, right, I've just told you to do that. Are you taking accountability for that? And then you get them to replay what you've told them to do. And that might not be in the moment. It might be something complex. You say, right, go away, think about your plan and come and back brief me. And those are all tools that you learn in the military, and you're not necessarily consciously saying, right, I need to go into my toolbox and use this, that, and the other. But it's stuff that's just ingrained into you. And then the last thing is the sort of, the self-discipline, being on time, sort of showing up, doing your research for meetings, keeping yourself fit. Most ex-military people keep themselves fit. Luke's seen my fitness deteriorate over the years, so he's probably laughing at that. But, I say I sort of, I go to the gym most mornings, I do my mobility and stuff like that. So, and that's kind of ingrained. And my girlfriend's ex-military, and she was in the military for 20 years, and she's even more disciplined than me. So there's a whole number of things.
It's interesting. I think one of the first thing you said was communication, because in my experience, the gents that I work with and deal with, we look at what they're doing holistically, habits, behaviors, mindset. And what I always talk about is you're the sum product of your daily actions, habits, behaviors, and choices. It's not one big thing. It's all the things that add up en masse that result in you looking and feeling as you want. And so that's also really important. But often a lot of the problems and issues that guys face that impact all of that stuff is often miscommunication. A lot of the gents I talk to, especially in the second phase of the program, where we widen the net and look a little bit deeper at things, it's often relationship with the wife or with staff or with kids. And it often comes from a mismatch of expectations or an assumption of communication that's there that actually hasn't been there. And that's often where, and actually when you pull those layers back, most of the time, not always, people they're coming at the same problem and they're on the same place, but they're not understanding, or there's a I guess ultimately a miscommunication of what they're trying to communicate or achieve. And there's a phrase that I love, which I bang on about lots, which is unspoken expectations or premeditated resentments. And I think we can make assumptions about what other people think or behave. They shouldn't know that. Well, do they? Because if they don't, it's on you to be able to explain that and communicate that. And if you're not, it's not their problem, it's yours. And I think from what you're describing there, it sounds like in the military, that's pretty open and bare. There's not a lot of ambiguity. And I guess to some degree, sometimes you might not have to soften that depending on the situation you're in. But equally, being completely open and transparent actually makes life easier. And the more we embrace that, the easier it is. But for me, it's not about what they or the others aren't doing. It's you. How are you communicating? And I think that's kind of where it stems from. And that's that sort of self-accountability and discipline piece, right?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with that. And I think that is abundantly true in relationships, work. I know you follow a guy called Alex Hormozy, he says something like, the difficult conversations you're not having are the ones that are holding you back. So having that open conversation with your partner and being clear but doing it in a work, if you're giving someone feedback, it's not in a confrontational way. It's just saying, look, these are the things. So if I'm giving one of my team feedback, these are the things that we need to improve on. Giving context is really important as well. So I had a very difficult conversation with one of my team a couple of weeks ago, and I had to explain a lot of context to really frame the conversation. So I think that's very important. But yeah, I think being comfortable having difficult conversations, and also, we're always, if we're having difficult conversations, we're always thinking, right, what am I going to say next? Immediately thinking about defending yourself. Whereas actually, if you're trying to have a conversation, you're listening. You're not thinking, right, I need to kind of like chop off those 5 arguments you've made.
Yeah.
So having the space for difficult conversations is very much part of it as well.
And something you said there, winning an argument, right? Well, if you've won an argument, you made someone else a loser. And that doesn't really create a great dynamic. There's a phrase I was working on some thinking, but it's something along the lines of, you'll discard facts that you don't like anyway, and actually, or being right doesn't win hearts, and it definitely doesn't win minds. And so it's not about being a doormat either and just accepting whatever happens, but equally, like trying to score points in an argument, be that or a conversation, be that with anyone, it doesn't really work. And so I think an open, inquisitive mindset to be able to get to the bottom of what's going on is what's important. And I think if we were to foster that as a way of thinking, that we're talking about this in communication, but equally within problems and issues and with work or things that aren't working, if we can look at it like that, well, then it's I think it makes life a little bit easier, right?
Definitely. I mean, someone phrased it far better than I did, where they just said it's not about being right, it's about having the right effect. So yeah. If you're trying to sort of work with someone in your team, you may be right, but if it causes the wrong effect or the change in behavior you want to have from them or whatever it is, then what's the point in being right?
Exactly.
You win something, but you kind of lose what you're trying to achieve. So yeah, and that's actually absolutely the sentiment you're making as well.
So if we were to look back to your military career, Stu, and then looking at, you were out, you were deployed, you did several tours, and I imagine some of that was intense, dramatic, and pretty harrowing, I'm sure, at times. What did you learn from, I guess, being in such, visceral, chaotic environments, and how have you managed to apply some of that into day-to-day life, both in a corporate setting, but also just your day-to-day living? Because I talk to gents a lot about having discipline and the whole phrase, the obstacle is the way, and like life happens. Now, this is compared to being at war and being shot at, there's levels, right? But equally, often I think gents, things can happen and they feel like it derails you and I'll start again next time and it's all gone pear-shaped. Whereas actually, the way I like to look at it is life and things are going to happen constantly. And it's about being able to be resilient and roll with whatever's being thrown at us. And I think being in a theatre of war is a very, very extreme example of that. Yeah. But I think it can highlight what's important. So could you speak to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think there's a number of layers to it. So I think there's firstly, nothing prepares you for that, getting into that environment, that warfare environment. You think you can prepare for it and then you get into it, and it is a visceral shock to the senses. And I just mean getting into the war theatre before you're even getting shot at. And that takes a fair bit of getting used to. Then you're then getting shot at and you're in the battle, and you very much get tunnel vision. So you're not able to kind of see the bigger picture, and it takes you a while to just naturally assimilate that to that information, to that situation. What that gives you is that when you're in new situations, whether it's work or stressful things are happening, is almost just kind of, I don't mean just like letting it wash over you so that you don't do anything, but just accepting that things are happening and you might not be able to control them, and knowing that eventually you will kind of work your way through it. And, I've had various sort of stressful things happen since I've left the military, breakups, stress at work. And I've kind of always just said to myself, look, things are not great now, but I just keep doing the small things day after day. And then things will improve or the situation will start to resolve it. That's quite an important thing. So you do get conditioned to the environment, particularly. I don't think you should be in acute stressful environments forever because we'll have nervous breakdowns. But I think you do get more conditioned, and then the next time you're there, it might not be exactly the same, but you're able to sort of draw on that experience and work out how you manage yourself. I think there's a lot about preparation you can do. So a lot of the principles you advocate, look, if you're fitter, you're more able to deal with stress. You're more able, if you need to work those long hours, you're not thinking, oh, bloody hell, I'm trying to start this fitness regime, but I haven't got time to the gym. You can get your sort of 10 minutes of quick exercise in for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And I think fitness just gives you a much greater ability to deal with stress. You sleep better, all that kind of stuff. But also really knowing your job or what you're trying to be good at. So, we really hammered the basics before we went to Afghanistan. So we were really good at shooting. So we practiced shooting because when you're getting shot at, you don't have the time to sort of get in the right position. You're kind of shooting instinctively. We got very good at navigation. So we were able to very quickly call in air or call in mortars and things like that. So you kind of were able to map read and just really basic skills and drills. When you're sort of living out for 2 weeks in, essentially the sort of Afghan villages and things like that, you have to live out of essentially a rucksack in your belt kit because that's all you've got. And that makes a massive difference. So I think those are quite important. And then the last thing is, it's difficult to remember whether I learned this at the time or I've learned it retrospectively, but I certainly apply it now. And multiple people have commented on this is how I come across at work, is managing your own emotional state. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably the biggest lesson that I took from going away. Because when you're in warfare, sometimes you need to remain very, very calm because the soldiers are looking at your reaction. You're speaking to someone on radio. If you're speaking quickly and panicky, it starts to radiate down to other people and people can't understand you. And if you're trying to coordinate various different things, it can be difficult to understand. But also when things are going wrong, you sometimes need to inject some energy into the situation. And I kind of had this like burning anger the whole time while I was out there. And I wouldn't allow myself to feed on it sometimes. Then sometimes I would feed on it and I would just almost have this kind of devil would come out of me because I was kind of trying to G people into doing things. In the corporate setting, when you're under stress, you're probably more likely to be in the managing your energy, keeping your energy lower, keeping the anger from coming out, because actually all you do is stress other people out. If you're stressed and it's kind of, it escalates. However, there will be situations with big pitches and things like this where you need the energy. Maybe it's the nervousness, you turn that into excitement. So, managing your own emotional state, I think it is very, very important. And it's, some people will be very good at it. Some people will need to work a lot on it. And there's various different mechanisms to do that.
I think what you just said there, though, Stu, in terms of the final bit about managing your emotional state, it applies at all levels. In the boardroom, but as a parent, because I saw Jocko posted something a while ago, Jocko Willink, for anyone who doesn't know Jocko, and he was talking about parenting. He's like, you've let a 4-year-old make you angry. That's a beautiful example of that, because it's like what a young child needs, or if you've got kids, they need you to be able to hold and contain those emotions and show that you're there. And if they're going mad, not reacting to them and what they're doing. Now, don't get me wrong, kids can be incredibly stressful and push your buttons, and none of us are perfect. But that emotional regulation, I think, is super important. Now, you're talking about it in a very, very extreme example, but it's the same thing applied no matter what the situation is. There's a situation, I think we all know when we haven't emotionally regulated well, because you come out from a situation and go, didn't shout myself in glory there. No matter what's happened, you just know it hasn't gone well, right? And so I think the ability to be able to take a breath, you said that tunnel vision approach, but we get tunnel vision in an argument or at work or with our spouse or with the kids, and to be able to just take a breath, take a step and just detach and look and go, hold up a second, what's actually going on here? I think is to be honest, it's what makes life tolerable. Sounds like life's not like it's bad, but it makes life easier, right? But then how do we achieve that headspace and state, or being able to emotionally regulate? I think it stems back from what you were saying, those other little or large elements of how you take care of yourself. The physical aspect is huge, but also how you're managing your time, your stress, and those other elements, because that's what dictates the overall state that you're in. In a setting of war, you've got that's being tested to the absolute limit. But equally, it's applying that same thinking so you can get the most out of your team, yourself, and keep moving forward towards the objective. Just like in war at home, things go wrong. People say things that piss you off. Like you have unexpected curveballs that come in. But the more we can regulate our emotions, I think for me, the easier life becomes, because your life is those interactions. That's what makes up your life, right? We're not little silos that work on our own. We're constantly interacting with the world.
100%. And also, it's important to kind of understand. So, I regularly go against my own advice and get things wrong. Having been through all these situations, I was out walking the dog last year, and I was having a very stressful period at work. Which I, on a conscious level, I wasn't stressed about, but I know subconsciously I was. And people said, you're stressed. And my dog ran off and started sort of messing around with someone who was just throwing a rugby ball around. And this guy kept sort of remonstrating from 150 meters away. And I was getting really worked up about it. And afterwards I was like, why did you get so worked up about that? And it's because I had all this other stuff going on in the other part of my life. And I kind of almost sort of gave myself a mini, okay, well, so this is going on. So you just need to watch yourself. And I think, and this is less about the army, but I think that kind of like your voice, being kind with yourself. So not then going down a hole in a critic rabbit hole. It's like, oh, well, you got that wrong. You got that interaction wrong. Your inner voice should be your best friend from my understanding. So accepting that you get it wrong, letting yourself off the hook, and then saying, okay, so I got that wrong. How will I maybe do that slightly different next time?
That for me is the key part. None of us are robots, and you might have a podcast like this and we talk like with the authorities and we get everything right. Absolutely not. I constantly fuck up all the time. All the things I'm discussing, I get wrong just as much as everyone else.
You see me on the jiu-jitsu mat lose multiple times.
Yeah, exactly. Well, exactly. Likewise, and with the kids and with my missus, and we get things wrong all the time. The key part is to acknowledge that. The next bit is to go, well, you can just do that and go, well, that's just how I am. And I think that's unfortunately how a lot of people default. I'm just an angry person. I'm just an anxious person. I'm just a whatever, insert whatever. But then if you go, and we talk about this detachment, wanting to be better, emotionally regulated, showing up better, we go, well, actually, I can learn here. And if you go, that's happened, great, didn't shine myself in glory. Well, what was going on? What would I do differently next time? Oh, well, actually, you've had hardly any sleep because the kids were up all night. You've got this massive pitch today, and you haven't been able to exercise. Okay, well, there's a few elements for why, right? Doesn't excuse my behaviour, but we know that. What can I do to address that? Straight away, that stops you being a victim, puts you in control, and there's elements there that you can address. Often what people do, unfortunately, is default to, I saw, fuck, that's it. Not getting the magnifying glass out and have a little look. And often, the example I always give is that you ask someone to exercise in the morning, and you go, just a 5-minute workout, and they go, right then, come back, did you do the workout? They say no. And so you can call them a fucking lazy prick, and they might do it, but then it doesn't really get anywhere. And they might say, well, why didn't it happen? Because I'm lazy. Okay. Or ask why again. Well, actually, I'm tired. Oh, okay. Why are you tired? I was up until midnight. Why were you up until midnight? Because I was stressed out in my head when I got in. I was playing on my phone. The missus was annoyed at me because I was playing on my phone. I ignored the kids. Then I had half a bottle of wine to take the edge off. And I saw this news report. Okay, so are you a lazy prick? Or do we need to have a look at your evening routine, your habits, behaviours, exercise, and so on? And so the reason I'm spilling off that example is because it highlights we often default to patterns of behaviour. And actually, if you give yourself a little bit of grace and have a look, there's usually, in my experience, a multitude of elements that are inputting into why that's happened. And then once you address that, or at least look at that, then you can start to address that. So your example with the dog, you go, oh, she has a bit of a prick there. Why did that happen? Oh, that's it. And actually, what am I not doing at the moment? Oh, well, maybe I'm not journaling as much as I used to, or I'm not managing my stress, or actually I'm leaning on, I'm not saying you are, but leaning on alcohol a bit more, whatever it is. You go, okay, well, maybe I calm that down. And so then that gives you something you can address. And I think that ultimately empowers you to be able to have autonomy within your life, right?
I think, yeah, you're right. Just having that curiosity and not having that closed mindset to just say, oh, I'm not confident, or I'm a stressful person, that we're all able to change to a certain degree, and we're all able to change our behavior. So I think you're 100% right. Just exploring. Yeah, sleep is a massive one. We probably, it's very difficult to, if you've got a family, get the amount of sleep you should have. As much as people say, oh, you need to get 7 or 8 hours a night. Luke's got 3 kids. You're up early, I'm up early. I like that discipline. So sometimes sleep, but then understanding that there's going to be a knock-on effect to that.
Trade-off.
Yeah. And recognizing I'm sleep deprived, I need to be less. I know I might be a bit more reactive. So I think that curiosity is very important.
How did you best because you were an officer, so you're leading a troop of guys as well. How did you best manage, I guess, others in that stressful environment? So when you're really stressed, and maybe you're thinking, "Fuck, this is going to be pear shaped." How did you find? And this again, it speaks to that emotional regulation. But how did you do that? And I guess because I imagine you probably got some guys who are absolutely fine, pretty stoic. Other guys maybe freaking out a bit. How did you find that? And again, I think this is because it has how you apply that can apply kind of elsewhere. How did you sort of manage those kind of situations?
Yeah, and that's the nub of what leadership in operations or war is about. So if I sort of look at myself first, so when I first got out there, absolutely petrified, obviously wasn't showing that,
Yeah.
but deep down I was having all these conversations with myself.
Yeah.
Well, what have you done? Why have you put yourself in this position? You might not see your parents again, all that, having all those sort of conversations, which didn't last too long, thankfully. I kind of almost made a slightly unusual deal with myself, which happy to talk about. But whenever I've described it to people who aren't in the military, they're always a bit sort of shocked that you've gone through that thought process. And then one of the advantages you have as an officer is you're so busy managing different things. So map reading, coordinating things, you're very busy planning, briefing people. You don't have a huge amount of time to actually dwell on your emotions. So I did have this kind of nervousness that the 24 hours or the day before going out on a patrol, so we'd often go out at night or we'd do big 2-week long patrols. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would be on edge. As soon as I stepped out on the ground, all that went away. And all I was focused on was doing my job. One of the things that really helps is just getting to know the men well. So getting to know your team well, because then they most of the time will back you. If they know you genuinely got their back, and people were getting dumped by their girlfriends out there, all sorts of stress from home, as much as you can help them with that goes a long way. I think, almost in a sort of, there's a pastoral element, because we had a lot of young guys, sort of 18, 19-year-olds, being that sort of slightly older brother where, you're kind of just, you're going around checking they're okay, making sure that they've got everything they need. There were people who couldn't cope with it. And, there was someone who displayed cowardice and didn't do what we wanted them to do and put men's lives at risk. We basically got rid of that person. He'd lost all respect of the blokes. It's quite dangerous. And, we just knew we needed to get him out of there when we were in a couple of acute stressful situations. So, we had a few guys killed, a couple of people lost legs. And, we dealt with one very, very stressful situation, completely chaotic. People weren't coping. People were in battle shock. And you kind of just have to get those people out there, out of that situation. And sometimes you don't necessarily do it in a particularly nice way. You do it in a unpleasant way because things need to happen quickly, because there's people whose lives are seriously in the balance. And, I carry a lot of regret on a couple of incidents that I was involved in where I did the right thing, but I look back and say, could I have maybe just been slightly nicer?
Yeah.
People will laugh at that. I mean,
I was going to say, you talk about giving yourself some slack.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, trust me, I'm not sitting awake at night worrying about it. But sometimes you just have to be that. My old boss said, you need a bit of cunt about you sometimes, and sometimes you do. And that's the military. It's not civilian life. You do unpleasant things, and sometimes that requires you to be unpleasant. So that was quite rare, but I would say probably the pastoral bit was quite important. The other bit, and I'm kind of going off this topic a little bit, but this is quite relevant for the corporate environment, is most teams you'll have people who are more experienced than you, who've been doing the job for 15, 20 years, whatever. I had 3 people working with me. One probably been doing it for 12, 13 years. Bear in mind, I'd been doing it for 3. Another guy who'd probably been doing it for at least 10, and then another one probably 4 or 5. So collectively, what's that, 25 to 30 years experience. Every time we were told to do something, I got them in a room, discussed the plan, and generally we were in agreement on what to do. And then I briefed the blokes and, they stepped in right behind me and made sure things happened. But the occasional time where I didn't agree with them and said, we're not doing that, we're doing it my way, because I'd given them the opportunity to discuss it, they completely sort of backed me up. There was no, the boss has got this really shit idea.
Yeah.
But I think I've got a few people who work for me, and I always try and discuss things with them first and explain the context as well, going back to a point I made earlier.
Yeah, well, I mean, leaning on expertise is really important. I mean, and recognizing that you don't know it all. And actually, if you want to be a great leader, if anything, you want your team to do the work for you, right? And you're about being I guess what's the word? You're the director of an orchestra. What are they called, those people? I forgot the name.
The violinists and
Conductor, yeah,
multiple,
you're the
yeah.
conductor. Sorry, but that's not a big one. And I guess the having to be really visceral in an extreme situation is probably less relevant to day-to-day life. I think you would like to think most of the time you can actually put yourself into a situation where or in a state where you can regulate that, but sometimes certain situations call for that, right? But everything you're saying there, to me, it just translates into, again, communication, understanding where people are, who are at, meeting people where they're at, and involving people in the process. And so, I guess in a work corporate setting, it's not me, boss, I know best, because that's just full of hubris and never usually ends well. And actually recognizing you've got 25 years of experience there, who are you to say if you're just 3 years into, where you've been in your deployments and they've got, collective experience like that? Will you be crazy not to leverage and lean on that, right?
Exactly. And I think the world's moved on from the sort of heroic leader where, you sort of get up on a stage, follow me, everyone, this is what we're doing, and sort of that almost slightly dictatorial approach. I mean, particularly with the sort of younger generation now, the context of everything is so important to them. And there's a lot more challenge from junior people now. So explaining why you're making a decision becomes more important, but also, not necessarily trying to sort of please everyone. Ultimately, if you're pleasing everyone as a leader, you're probably not leading, you're probably their friend.
Yeah.
Knowing what your boundaries are, being flexible within, a sort of left and right of arc, if excuse the military pun, but, knowing that what your red lines are. Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but no, this is what's happening.
Yeah. And the boundaries bit there, both from a work life perspective, is so important as well. I think so many people, in my experience, have blurred boundaries all over the place in terms of work, life, family, and themselves as well, and how they show up and do what they do. I think actually having clear boundaries and structure for yourself. Some people think it makes it sound boring, but actually it makes life much easier. And for communication, it makes it easier because people know where they stand. And this is where a lot of the guys I work with are like, "I'm so busy and I've got to work until 11:30 at night." I was like, "Well, who says?" "Yeah, well, they just keep sending me emails." "Who's replying? And have you ever told them you can't send me emails like that?" "No." "Well, who's again looping back to unspoken expectations?
Yeah,
Who's in charge there, right?" I'm not saying we don't always have to work late, but the point I'm getting to there is that we are often the authors of our own chaos, and being able to be clear about boundaries, I think, is incredibly important, both as a leader, as a dad, as a husband, within your own life and your own behaviours. That being said, if you were to look back then, Stu, as where you are now in terms of the journey you've been on, the experience you've had, both military, work, corporate, what would you tell like a younger version of yourself? What's the biggest learning that you've had from the experience we've been discussing that you'd say to a young version of you?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I mean, I know you're into philosophy, but that's that's a good one. So I'd probably say, certainly younger me, you don't need to know all the information before making a decision. So I think that probably knowing decision making, and a lot of it comes with experience, but being able to make a decision on imperfect information and backing it, I think, is important. So sometimes we try and sort of, we're paralleled by over analysis. So I think normally your gut will know what the right decision is, when it comes to relationships, work. I think that's really important. But on the flip side of that is, and ex-military people are generally born, they want to put something into action. So here's the end destination. Let's just get on with it. Sometimes you kind of need to let a problem assimilate. So I'm contradicting myself here, but this is where the experience comes in. You kind of need to just actually, do I need to deal with that now? That doesn't mean you're avoiding the problem. It might be, do you know what? I need a bit more time to think about it. I need some time away from work to let my subconscious work on it. I've got a really good friend who, is a partner at a big consulting firm. He joined KPMG same time as me. Whenever he's in the office, he goes running at lunchtime. Because he gets his fitness in. He's got 3 children. He's got a young kid. So when he's at home, going back to boundaries, he wants to be present at home. So, but he said whenever he's working on a tricky problem at work, and he does regulatory accounting, it's like very technical accounting, like very ultra geeky, he's able to normally, when he's out running, really think that problem through, or maybe not think about it. And he's able to, his subconscious gives him the answers. So I think probably just knowing, firstly, having the confidence to make a decision with imperfect information, and then knowing those problems that because you're emailing and you're working, your subconscious is very powerful. Giving yourself the space for your subconscious to make that decision. And I think certainly as I've got older in my career, I've been less worried about having to sort of spend or reply to every single I don't think email is even working. So just properly giving yourself the space to let those tricky problems germinate, and not germinate, but, kind of the solution just whirring away in your subconscious. And then you'll know then when the right time to act on it is.
What I like about your answer there is there's a dichotomy in it. Actually, in life, that's life. Often things aren't binary. It's messy. It's grey. Like we were saying right at the start about how life's chaotic, things happen, and what do we do with it? And so, in one degree, it's like, well, actually, being able to go, no, that's it. This isn't perfect, but feel like that feels okay. Bang, we'll go for it. Take the action, because if you're not, you're just spinning your wheels and you stay stuck. But on the absolute flip of that, it's like, well, sometimes maybe you need to stop and take a pause and actually think things through, but give yourself the headspace and grace to be able to process it. And neither's right or wrong. And that kind of dichotomy, I often talk to the guys about, especially guys who first start with me, because I talk about discipline and accountability and building habits. And you can think, right, let's go. And then in a week or two in, something with inherently 100%, use inverted commas here, gone wrong, which is good, because that's how we learn. We ask why, we get to the root of it. And then a lot of the time as a coach, my job is to go, it's not as bad as you think, chill out, keep going. Actually, that's it. But then the dichotomy there is that, yeah, but you're telling me I need to be disciplined and get on with it. I was like, yeah, but sometimes that's the best you could do today, and that's okay. Yeah, I want to be disciplined, and yeah, I want to push myself, and I want to be successful. But today, my kids haven't slept. They were up all night being sick. I wasn't able to train because half the house has fallen down. Okay, well, today, high performance day, is me doing 5 push-ups and not eating a donut at lunch, right? Yeah. That is it. It's not because you're a lazy cunt. It's because actually that's all you could do. Being able to flex and flow and be resilient to that and go, yeah, but tomorrow I can. And that's not me pushing it off to tomorrow. It's being realistic with what I can achieve today. It could be a big decision in a corporate setting, or it could just be how you show up and what you need to do. But being able to ebb and flow between that allows you to be able to show up as we want, right?
What you're describing with sort of some of the new clients is the perfectionism. Even elite sportsmen within that elite environment, I'm sure will have days where they're too tired or they're not able to. So accepting that actually you're not going to have a perfect day, but over a period of time, can you consistently do the right things? It may not be the 2-hour training session you want to do, although who's got time to train for 2 hours?
Exactly.
It may just be, I know you've sort of posted that you've been busy. You just get a 20-minute workout in, or a 15 or 10-minute workout in. You're right. Sometimes that's enough, knowing that time will come for you to do a longer workout in the future.
Or work-life boundaries with your phone. Well, normally I like to put my phone down at 5 when I get in with the kids, but I've got a massive deal going through. Well, could you put it down at 9 rather than midnight? Okay. I see what I mean. And it's that level of thinking rather than that binary nature of it's all on or it's all off. The client who was on a couple of weeks ago, Tony, he gave me this. He's a client from a few years ago, but he came back on. He's got an amazing story. But he gave me this analogy, which I love, which is that perfectionist analogy, which is you're driving down the road, you're like, shit, I've got a puncture. So you jump out and stab the other 3 tyres. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Put the knife down, get out the puncture repair kit, and let's keep going. It's a really nice analogy for that. And a lot of us behave in that perfectionist way. Was actually, if we could let a little bit of grace, like you were saying, just that internal voice just calm down a little bit, and it allows things to breathe. And again, that works, I guess, at multiple levels. Stu, it's been an amazing chat. I know you're a very, very busy man, so I don't want to cannibalize any more of your time. Really appreciate you coming on to talk. I've got a lot of it. I'm sure anyone watching or listening will have got a lot out of it too. Hopefully see you back on the mat soon as well when that the shoulder repairs itself.
It's the right shoulder, so you know which one to attack.
That's it, straight away.
Exactly. But no, thanks for having me on, Luke. Yeah, absolute pleasure. Love what you're doing. Really, really pleased to see the business thriving. And see you on the mats, if not for a non-alcoholic beer steam.
Most definitely, thank you. And on that note, thank you, Stu. If anyone's watching and they're interested about how I could help, anything like that, drop me a note in the DM or in the comments. Otherwise, I will see you all next week. Cheers, guys.